The city outside my window was a watercolor smudge of exhaust and drizzle, a fitting backdrop for my perpetually grey mood. My office, a single room above a dim some joint, smelled faintly of stale tea and older mysteries. Dust motes danced in the anemic light filtering through the grimy pane, illuminating the stacks of forgotten files that served as my only decor. My name is James, and I'm a private investigator. Mostly, I find lost cats or track down spouses with wandering eyes. The grander cases, the ones that paid well, were as rare as sunshine in November. I was contemplating the structural integrity of a particularly wobbly desk leg when the buzzer rasped. I sighed, pushed away a lukewarm mug of coffee, and pressed the intercom. "Yeah, I have an appointment with you, James," a crisp, uninflected voice stated. "Regarding Mr. Thorne." "Ah, the one that actually paid," I buzzed. The man who entered a moment later was precisely tailored, a silhouette of expensive dark wool against the chaos of my office. He carried a slim leather briefcase and an air of quiet efficiency that immediately grated on my nerves. He didn't offer a handshake, merely a curt nod. "I am the representative," he announced, as if it were a title rather than a role. "My employer wishes to engage your services." I gestured vaguely at the worn armchair opposite my desk, its springs long since given up the ghost. He didn't sit, instead remaining upright, radiating an almost architectural rigidity. So I gathered, what's the trouble? Another missing heirloom, a blackmailed socialite. I leaned back, my chair groaning in protest. Neither. It concerns the recent passing of Elias Thorne. I raised an eyebrow. Elias Thorne. The name was familiar. A renowned art appraiser, a recluse by all accounts, known for his almost pathological fastidiousness and an uncanny eye for authenticity. His death had made the papers a week or so ago. A brief mention ruled a heart attack. I remember the reports. Sad business. Official cause was cardiac arrest, wasn't it? Nothing for a private investigator there. The representative's gaze was steady, unblinking. Officially, yes. However, my employer believes there are unanswered questions. Mr. Thorne was found dead in his residence within the brutalist apartment block on Elm Street. He was alone. The estate manager discovered him the following morning. And the official conclusion stands, I pressed. No foul play, no forced entry, nothing stolen. Just a heart giving out happens. My cynicism was a well-worn coat I wore for all occasions. Indeed. However, Mr. Thorne was a creature of habit, James. A meticulous man, to the point of obsession. His life was a meticulously crafted schedule, his apartment a meticulously curated space. Every object, every routine had its place and its time. I nodded slowly. That much I knew from the public record. Thorne was practically a legend in his field, famous for spotting the slightest anachronism in a forgery, the faintest deviation from an artist's known technique. A man who lived by precision. My employer was close to Mr. Thorne, knew his routines intimately. The official report states that Mr. Thorne was found in his living room, slumped in his favorite armchair. Dinner, untouched, was laid out on the low table before him. They concluded he must have suffered the attack just as he was about to eat. Sounds plausible enough, I said, though a tiny fissure of doubt had begun to form in my mind. Plausible for most people, perhaps, but for a man as rigidly structured as Thorne, my employer finds it difficult to reconcile. Thorne's evening routine was inviolable. He dined precisely at 7 o'clock, always in his formal dining room, never in the living area. Following dinner, he would retire to his study for an hour of reading, a specific brand of brandy, and a single, hand-rolled cigar. Only then, after his digestive and his reading, would he occasionally relax in the living room for a final half-hour before bed. I leaned forward, the squeak of my chair cutting through the sudden quiet. So, he was found in the wrong room at the wrong time, about to eat dinner that he never ate in that room, apparently before his usual after-dinner ritual. The representative finally moved, unlatching his briefcase. He extracted a thin folder and laid it on my desk. Precisely. The official explanation was that perhaps he felt unwell and decided to eat in the living room for a change. A sudden, uncharacteristic deviation, but my employer insists it is impossible. Thorne simply did not deviate from his schedule, particularly not for something as fundamental as his evening meal. I opened the folder. Inside were a few grainy photographs, clearly unofficial copies, and a summary of the official police report. I flipped through the pictures first. A stark, angular living room, concrete walls softened by expensive textiles, and a few carefully chosen pieces of art. The armchair indeed was plush, a dark velvet, and there on a minimalist coffee table was a dinner setting for one. A half-full glass of water, a pristine plate, cutlery arranged just so, untouched. My eyes scanned the photo of the table again. Then I looked at the summary report. The report mentions a cigar in an ashtray on the table. I read aloud, my finger tracing the line. Does, the representative confirmed. Dismissed as a pre-heart attack indulgence, but Mr. Thorne never smoked before his brandy, and his brandy decanter, according to the estate manager, was found still stoppered in his study, untouched. That was the detail. The small, almost imperceptible deviation that only someone intimately familiar with Thorne would notice. A cigar unlit in an ashtray before dinner with no brandy in sight. For anyone else, it might be a quirk. For Elias Thorne, it was a discordant note in a symphony of order. It was like finding a single brushstroke out of place in a masterpiece. It screamed artifice. So, I said, closing the folder and pushing it back across the desk. Your employer wants me to investigate a heart attack, to find out why a dead man broke his own rules. To uncover the truth no one else sees, the representative corrected. To find out if someone made him break his rules or broke them for him. I picked up the folder again, the weight of it suddenly heavier. My cynicism was still there, a dull ache, but it was now overlaid with something else, a prickle of intrigue, a challenge to my own observational skills. A man who lived by absolute precision, found dead in a scene that was just slightly off-kilter, a scene designed to look natural but failing in the minutiae. All right, I said, meeting his gaze. Tell your employer I'll take the case, but I work my way, no interference, and I charge by the hour starting now. The representative permitted himself a fractional nod, a barely perceptible shift in his rigid posture that I took as acceptance. Excellent. I shall arrange for your advance. He turned, his departure as precise and unhurried as his arrival. As the door clicked shut, I leaned back in my chair, listening to the city hum. The brutalist apartment block, an untouched dinner and an unlit cigar in the wrong place. This wasn't a heart attack. This was a puzzle. And I, James, had always been drawn to the things that didn't quite fit. The hunt was on. The crisp $100 bills felt strangely unsubstantial in my pocket, a stark contrast to the weight of the task ahead. The representative's fractional nod, precise as a surgeon's incision, had been my official notice. Advance paid, the hunt was on. My first move was always the same. Information. Not the kind whispered in hushed tones, but the kind shouted from newspaper headlines and archived journals. Elias Thorne, art appraiser extraordinaire, lived a life meticulously catalogued. His public persona was that of an unimpeachable authority, a man whose eye for authenticity was legendary, whose pronouncements could make or break a fortune. His reclusiveness, previously seen as eccentric genius, now cast a longer, more unsettling shadow. I spent the rest of the evening sifting through digital archives, cross-referencing auction records with art market analyses. Thorne had been a titan, but even titans accumulate rivals, disgruntled clients, and perhaps dangerous secrets. The official line, a heart attack, still felt like a flimsy veil. The next morning I started with the family. Thorne, I'd learned, had no spouse, no children. Just a niece, his only living relative, who had been the one to find him. Her name wasn't public, but a quick search through probate filings led me to an address, a brutalist apartment block on the city's periphery. It was a monolithic structure of raw concrete and repetitive windows, an architectural statement that felt more like a fortress than a home. Grey on grey, imposing and without embellishment. The kind of place that seemed to actively repel warmth. I took the rattling elevator up, the smell of stale cooking oil clinging to the recycled air. The niece's door, when I finally found it, was painted a dull institutional beige, peeling slightly at the edges. Not exactly what I'd expected from the heir to a renowned art appraiser's estate, however modest that inheritance might prove to be. A woman in her late 30s, dressed in a faded jumper and practical trousers, answered my knock. Her eyes, a startling shade of green, were underlined by dark smudges. Grief, I suspected, or perhaps just exhaustion. "Yes," he asked, his voice thin, wary. "James," I offered, holding up my identification. "I'm looking into your uncle's passing." He hesitated, his gaze flicking from my face to the ID and back again. "The police already." "I understand," I interrupted gently. "I'm working privately. Your uncle's benefactor is concerned, wants to ensure all avenues have been explored." That last bit was pure fabrication, but it usually worked. She sighed, stepping back. "Come in, just for a moment." The apartment was small, tidy, but dominated by stacks of books and papers, overflowing from every available surface. No art, I noticed, not a single painting or sculpture, just a few framed photographs on a small shelf. One of them showed a younger Elias Thorne, smiling faintly, an arm around a much younger version of the woman, now offering me a chipped mug of lukewarm tea. "He was private," she replied, clutching her own mug with both hands. "Always, but lately he was more so, distracted." "Distracted by what?" I prodded. She bit her lip. He wouldn't say, just long hours in his study, late-night calls. He'd mutter about integrity and exposing the truth, things like that. He was always passionate about his work, but this felt different, more urgent. She paused, her green eyes meeting mine. "He mentioned a forgery, something big, said he was close to proving it." "A forgery, an interesting thread. Did he mention details? What kind of art? Who might be involved?" She shook her head. "No, just that it was high stakes, he seemed. Almost afraid at times. Afraid of what would happen if he succeeded, or if he failed." I thanked her, leaving her to her quiet grief, the image of the brutalist Black's unyielding façade mirroring the information she'd given me. Elias Thorne, a man obsessed with exposing a major forgery. It was a plausible motive, perhaps even a compelling one. My next stop was a sleek, minimalist gallery downtown, all polished concrete and carefully lit canvases. The gallery owner, a sharp-suited individual with a meticulously sculpted beard, greeted me with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mr. Thorne's passing was a great loss to the art world," he intoned, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "A true titan." "Indeed," I replied, taking a seat opposite him in a stark chrome chair. I understand he was quite meticulous in his work. "Unfailingly so," the owner confirmed. His reputation was built on it. He could spot a fake across a room. And was he doing much of that recently? James, always someone trying to pass off a clever imitation as the genuine article. Elias, of course, was the ultimate gatekeeper. He leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly. "I did hear, through the grapevine, that he was particularly focused on a certain series of works. Renaissance-era drawings, if memory serves. Some believed they were newly discovered, others suspected a masterful modern fabrication. Elias was reportedly very close to making a definitive statement. A definitive statement that would ruin someone's reputation, perhaps, I suggested. He steepled his fingers. At the very least, the market for such pieces is considerable. The fallout from such an exposure would be catastrophic for the seller, the previous authenticators, perhaps even the galleries involved. I moved on to a rival appraiser, a woman whose office was crammed with dusty tomes and framed certificates. He was less guarded than the gallery owner, more openly resentful of Thorne's preeminence. "Thorne was a purist," she scoffed, gesturing vaguely with a pen, always chasing the ghost of absolute truth. And lately, it was all about this Renaissance business. I heard he had a breakthrough, something that would shake the foundations of a very lucrative corner of the market. A breakthrough that someone might want to keep quiet, I ventured. She gave me a knowing look. "In this business, Mr. James, reputation is currency. A forger exposed, a collection devalued, a legacy tarnished. People have done worse for less." The pieces were beginning to align. Thorne, the uncompromising guardian of authenticity, on the verge of exposing a monumental forgery. A forgery that, if revealed, would send shockwaves through the art world, destroying careers and fortunes. It was a clean, brutal motive, perfectly suited to the polished, cutthroat world Thorne inhabited. I felt the tension coil in my gut. This wasn't just a heart attack. This was a carefully orchestrated murder, designed to look like a natural end, all to protect a masterpiece of deception. And I was just beginning to peel back the layers. The idea of a sprawling forgery ring, while dramatic, had always struck me as too convenient, too neat. My cynicism, a well-worn companion, whispered that the obvious path was rarely the true one. Thorne, a man who built his reputation on the relentless pursuit of authenticity, wouldn't have just stumbled into a generic criminal enterprise. He was too precise, too obsessive. His death, I was increasingly certain, wasn't collateral damage in some grand scheme. It was targeted, surgical. I spread his meticulous notes across my desk again, the lamplight glinting off the faint pencil marks. Thorne's hand, precise even in death. I ignored the broader files on known forgers and their networks, letting my gaze drift over the more obscure entries, the ones that seemed almost like personal annotations. He categorized everything, cross-referenced every whisper, every rumor. But there were certain names, certain pieces, that appeared with a frequency that suggested a deeper, more personal fixation. One particular painting kept snagging my attention, The Serpent's Embrace, a Renaissance era portrait, attributed to a lesser-known master, but celebrated for its enigmatic subject and vibrant, almost unsettling, color palette. It was a centerpiece in the private collection of the Aldridge family, old money, old power, old secrets. A family known more for their impenetrable privacy than their philanthropic gestures. Thorne had a file on it, thin but dense, tucked away not with the general Renaissance section, under disputed provenance high value. Inside, I found not just provenance records and auction house catalogs, hand-drawn sketches of brushwork details, microscopic analyses of pigments. Surprisingly, several photographs of the painting taken from odd angles, highlighting what looked like minute cracks in the varnish. Perhaps subtle inconsistencies in the paint layers. No definitive conclusions, no red flags screamed from the page, but Thorne's intense scrutiny was palpable. He wasn't just appraising this painting, he was dissecting it. He was hunting, not for the money, but for the principle, for the purity of art itself. This wasn't about a run-of-the-mill fake being passed off to an unsuspecting buyer. This was about a prestigious masterpiece, a jewel in a powerful family's crown, possibly being a lie. The stakes weren't just financial, they were reputational, historical. If Thorne was close to exposing The Serpent's Embrace as a forgery, the fallout would be catastrophic for the Aldridges. Their credibility, their carefully curated image of refined taste and unimpeachable legacy, would shatter, and families like that didn't take kindly to shattered illusions. My next step felt clear. I needed to find out who Thorne might have spoken to about this specific painting. He was reclusive, but not entirely isolated. He had contacts, informants, fellow scholars who might have shared his quiet obsession. I pulled on my worn leather jacket, the cool morning air already biding at the edges of the city. My destination was a monstrous brutalist apartment block on the city's industrial fringe. A towering concrete behemoth that seemed to defy gravity with its sheer, unadorned mass. The kind of place where sunlight struggled to penetrate the lower floors and optimism went to die. Inside, the air was stale, smelling of damp concrete and forgotten lives. The lift was a cage of rattling metal, graffiti scratched into its dull gray walls. I emerged on the 14th floor, the hallway a narrow canyon of identical doors. My contact, an elderly archivist named Mrs. Albright, lived here. He was a woman who hoarded information like a magpie hoarded trinkets, a repository of art world gossip and forgotten histories, though she rarely parted with it easily. Thorne had paid her handsomely for her discretion, and I hoped my benefactor's deep pockets would sway her too. Her apartment was a claustrophobic warren of overflowing bookshelves and precarious stacks of papers. The faint scent of dust and old tea hung heavy in the air. "James," he rasped, his voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement, him spectacles perched precariously on the end of him nose. "Thorne's ghost, come to haunt me." "Just following his trail," I answered, offering him a crisp envelope, thick with cash. Her eyes, sharp behind the lenses, flickered to the bulge. "He was asking about the Aldridges," she began, her fingers already tearing at the seal. "Specifically about the serpent's embrace. He was agitated, more so than usual, said he had a hunch that went deeper than just academic curiosity, mentioned something about an original sin hidden beneath layers of deceit." She paused, her gaze distant, recalling. "He was asking about the painting's provenance before the Aldridges acquired it. Wanted to know about the collection it came from, the one that supposedly vanished during the war." "Did he find anything?" I pressed. She shook her head slowly. "Not from me. The records are fragmented, conveniently so in some cases. The Aldridges are very good at making things disappear or appear as needed. He was getting close, though, I could tell. He had that look in his eye, the one that meant he was about to rip something apart. Did he mention anyone else he might have spoken to? A former restorer, I think, someone who worked on the painting decades ago. Said the man was old, senile, but might have remembered something odd about the underpainting. He gave me a sympathetic yet warning look. Be careful, James. The Aldridges protect their treasures fiercely. Not just the art, but their name. Thorne knew that. He underestimated it. I thanked her, leaving her to count her newfound wealth. The information was a double-edged sword, a clear direction, but one that led straight into the jaws of a powerful beast. The windows were tinted, reflecting the grey sky like blank eyes. I kept my pace even, not looking directly at the car, but my peripheral vision registered its presence. This wasn't some random encounter. The game had shifted. Thorne hadn't just been on the verge of exposing a forgery, he'd been on the verge of exposing their forgery. And now, I was following in his footsteps. The killer, it seemed, was well aware of my pursuit. My personal stake in this wasn't just professional anymore. It was becoming very, very personal. I thanked her, leaving her to count her newfound wealth. As I navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the brutalist apartment block, the air felt heavier, the silence more profound. The art dealer's nervous energy had been contagious, a whisper of the danger I was now actively pursuing. A forgery, a family's reputation, and Elias Thorne, a man who valued truth above all else, dead. It wasn't just about the painting anymore. It was about what that painting represented. I found myself back at my small, cluttered office, the familiar scent of old paper and lukewarm coffee, a strange comfort after the sterile brutality of the apartment block. I needed to dig deeper into this masterpiece. The art dealer had given me the name of the family who currently owned it, a lineage stretching back generations, their wealth and prestige inextricably linked to their art collection. I fired up my old desktop, the hum of the fan a steady drone against the quiet evening. My fingers flew across the keyboard, tracing the painting's journey through auction houses and private sales. I cross-referenced names, dates, and catalog entries. It wasn't long before a pattern emerged, subtle at first, then glaring. The painting, a celebrated landscape from the Dutch Golden Age, had a curious gap in its provenance, a period of about 50 years in the late 19th century where its whereabouts were vaguely documented, attributed to a private European collection. That was a red flag, the size of a billboard. Reputable pieces rarely went off the grid for so long without a scandal attached. I shifted my focus to the family itself, the current owners. Their history was a tapestry of old money and quiet power, but even the most polished surfaces could hide cracks. I found an obscure academic paper from the 1970, a dry, dense analysis of art patronage and financial downturns among European aristocracies. Buried deep within a footnote, it mentioned a significant financial crisis that had almost crippled the family's ancestors around the same time the painting had vanished from public record. The paper hinted at unconventional means used to restore their fortunes, a veiled reference to something less than legitimate. My gut tightened. This wasn't just about a forgery, it was about a century-old secret, a foundational lie that propped up an entire dynasty. Then I found it. An article from a niche art journal dated a year before Thorne's death. It was an interview with Elias Thorne himself, discussing the increasing sophistication of art forgery and the challenges of authenticating older works. Towards the end, almost as an aside, The interviewer pressed him on specific pieces that had recently come under scrutiny. Thorne, typically guarded, had mentioned a certain Dutch landscape, long held by a prominent European family, expressing his professional reservations about its dating and attribution. He'd alluded to new scientific techniques, specifically carbon dating and pigment analysis, that could offer unimpeachable clarity where historical records failed. Unimpeachable clarity. Definitive proof. Thorne hadn't just suspected a forgery, he was on the verge of proving it. He had acquired, or was about to acquire, the scientific evidence that would rip apart the family's legacy, exposing a generations-old fraud. That's what he was doing in his heavily secured home, not just appraising, but meticulously dismantling a lie. And that's what got him killed. The powerful beast wasn't just protecting its art, it was protecting its very identity. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. This wasn't just a rich family's secret. It was a potentially catastrophic scandal, a house of cards built on a single, painted lie. Thorne had been too close, and now I was getting too close. I stretched, the old chair groaning in protest, and decided to call it a night. As I reached for my coat, my hand brushed against the framed certificate of my private investigator's license, hanging slightly askew on the wall. I paused. It wasn't just askew. The small nail holding it up was bent, almost pulled from the plaster. My gaze swept the room, suddenly hyper-aware. The stack of files on my desk, usually meticulously aligned, was off by a fraction of an inch. A pen, which I always left cap down, was now cap up. Small, almost imperceptible details, but enough to trigger the alarm bells ringing in my head. Someone had been here. They hadn't smashed anything, hadn't overturned furniture in a fit of rage. This was precise, surgical. They were looking for something specific, something I might have found, something Thorne might have left behind. My stomach clenched. The beast wasn't just snapping at my heels anymore. It had found my den. It knew I was digging, and it was desperate. The game had just escalated. The brutalist apartment block's concrete jaws seemed to clench tighter around me as I descended. The information I'd just acquired from the elderly resident wasn't just a lead. It was a gravitational pull, dragging me towards the epicenter of this whole charade. Elias Thorne, the reclusive art appraiser, wasn't just a victim of a convenient heart attack. He was a sacrifice, and the altar was a lie. I slid into my beat-up sedan, the engine coughing to life with a familiar grumble. The city lights blurred as I drove, but my mind was a spotlight, focusing on the scattered pieces of the puzzle. Elias Thorne had built an empire on his discerning eye, his unimpeachable integrity. So why was he found dead, seemingly of natural causes, just as he was on the cusp of a major re-evaluation of his family's most prized possession? The legacy built on a lie. That phrase, whispered to me by my mysterious benefactor, now echoed with chilling clarity. It wasn't about a single forged painting Elias might have been about to expose. It was about his own collection, or rather, the collection he had inherited and curated for decades. A cornerstone of his family's prestige, passed down through generations. A masterpiece, perhaps, that wasn't a masterpiece at all. I remembered my initial visit to Elias's study. The meticulously organized shelves, the hushed reverence for every artifact. And then the curator. The man who had been Elias's right hand, overseeing the Thorne collection for years, a figure as polished and meticulous as the artworks themselves. He'd been there, a picture of grief, yet there was a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in his voice when he spoke of Elias's recent anxieties regarding the collection's valuation. At the time, I dismissed it as normal stress. Now, it replayed in my mind like a discordant note in a symphony. Elias, the grand arbiter of authenticity, discovering a colossal forgery within his own hallowed halls. The shame, the scandal, not just financial ruin, but the complete demolition of his family's standing, his own life's work. It would destroy everything. But Elias Thorne wasn't one to shy from the truth, no matter how ugly. That was his nature. He would have exposed it. And that, I realized, was his death sentence. The curator. He was the one who stood to lose everything if the truth came out. His entire career was tied to the Thorne collection. His reputation, built on the illusion of its flawless provenance, would crumble into dust. He had more than financial motive, he had an existential one. His very identity was intertwined with that lie. I pulled over, the engine idling. The streetlights cast long, skeletal shadows. The poison. It had to be a poison, something untraceable, mimicking a heart attack. I'd read about such things in the darker corners of my research, obscure compounds, often derived from exotic plants or rare synthetics, designed to disrupt the heart's electrical rhythm or oxygen uptake without leaving a chemical signature. A killer who valued reputation and artifice would choose such a weapon. A clean kill, leaving no trace, preserving the illusion of a natural end. How would the curator have administered it? Elias, reclusive as he was, still had daily rituals. His morning tea, his evening digestive. Something routine, something he wouldn't suspect. The curator had access, intimate knowledge of Elias's habits, and the perfect opportunity. He could have slipped it into a preferred beverage, a subtle scent or taste masked by the drink itself. A slow-acting variant, perhaps, designed to take effect hours later, in the quiet solitude of the night. The pieces clicked together, each one fitting with a sickening precision. The heart attack was an artifice, a meticulously crafted illusion, just like the forgery Elias was about to expose. The killer wasn't a brute, he was an artist of deception. My phone vibrated. It was the benefactor's secured line. I answered. "It's James." Elias was about to expose a major forgery, likely the centerpiece. "And the method?" the voice asked, a hint of surprise. "A rare poison designed to mimic cardiac arrest, untraceable by design. He chose a weapon as artful as his crime." Another pause. "What's your next move, James?" "We need to lure him out," I responded, a plan already forming. "He thinks he's safe, that the truth died with Elias. We need to make him believe it's about to be resurrected." "How?" Elias had a particular appreciation for public discourse, even if he avoided crowds himself. I mused, thinking back to his published essays. He often wrote about the ethics of authenticity. He was scheduled to give a rare, private lecture next week at the Thorne Gallery, a retrospective on the collection's history. It was postponed after his death, of course. "And you propose to revive it?" "Not quite. We'll announce that an unreleased essay by Elias Thorne has been discovered, something that hints at a startling new re-evaluation of a key piece in the collection. A preliminary abstract, perhaps, leaked to a select few, including our curator. Make it sound like Elias's final, damning testament is about to go public." The voice on the other end chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "You're playing a dangerous game, James. He's a cautious man. He's also a vain man," I countered. "He won't be able to resist trying to control the narrative, to intercept this essay before it's officially released. He'll want to assess the damage, perhaps even try to discredit it before it sees the light of day. We'll set the meeting point at the Thorne Gallery, under the guise of an exclusive preview for key stakeholders before the public announcement. We'll give him an hour alone, with the essay in Elias's private office within the gallery. Just him, the document, and the ghosts of his deception. And when he arrives, he'll find me instead," I added, the tension in my voice palpable. "And the truth, waiting for him." I ended the call, the city's hum a distant thrum against my rising pulse. The air around me felt charged, heavy with anticipation. The trap was set. Now, all that was left was to wait for the beast to step into it. And when he did, I wouldn't just be revealing a killer. I'd be tearing down a meticulously constructed edifice of lies, brick by painful brick. The city's evening chorus swelled around me, a symphony of distant sirens and rumbling engines that did little to calm the thrumming in my own chest. I leaned against the cold, rough concrete of the brutalist apartment block, my eyes fixed on the entrance. The air was crisp, carrying the metallic tang of an approaching storm, and with it, the scent of resolution. The trap was sprung, and I could practically feel the threads tightening. My gaze drifted to the upper floors, where a single light glowed in a window my signal. The detective was in position, waiting for my cue. My hand, tucked into my coat pocket, felt the reassuring weight of the small, folded note I'd left for the patron. An anonymous tip, designed to lure him here, to the very building where Thorne had once secretly examined the disputed masterpiece, the one that had sealed his fate. The note had promised a final, damning piece of evidence, tucked away in an abandoned utility closet on the ground floor. A lie, of course, but a tempting one for a man who believed he'd left no loose ends. A sleek black car, too expensive for this part of town, glided to a halt at the curb. The patron emerged, a silhouette against the flickering streetlights. He wore the same tailored suit I'd seen him in before, an impeccable façade that betrayed nothing of the rot beneath. He glanced around, a quick, practiced scan, his posture radiating an almost arrogant confidence. He moved with a predator's grace, heading directly for the apartment block's entrance. I waited until he was inside, then pushed off the wall, my footsteps quiet on the cracked pavement. The lobby was dim, smelling of dust and stale air. The patron was already there, his face a mask of controlled expectation as he approached the utility closet I'd described. He produced a small key, his movements deliberate, almost theatrical. "Looking for something, old man?" I asked, my voice cutting through the silence. He froze, his hand still on the doorknob. Slowly he turned, his eyes narrowing as they found me in the gloom. There was no surprise, only a flicker of annoyance quickly masked. "James," he answered, his tone smooth, almost conversational. "I wondered if you'd be so rude as to interrupt my private affairs." "Your private affairs led to Elias Thorne's death," I countered, stepping further into the light cast by a broken overhead fixture and nearly to the destruction of his reputation. "Thorne suffered a heart attack," he stated, his voice even betraying no emotion. "A tragic, natural end." "A natural end, meticulously crafted," I corrected, watching him closely. "You knew Thorne was close to exposing your forgery ring, not just the one painting, but the entire collection you've been subtly introducing into the market." Thorne, with his reclusive habits and unparalleled eye, was the only one who could truly see the anachronism in the pigments, the subtle deviations in the brushstrokes. The man could spot a fake at 50 paces, even one as masterful as yours. The patron's lips twitched, a faint, almost imperceptible smile. A man of taste, indeed. "He found it," I continued, "a trace of a modern binder in an ancient masterpiece, something you thought undetectable. He confronted you, or at least he was about to. You couldn't allow that. Not with your entire legacy, your carefully constructed image as the discerning collector, hanging in the balance." "Reputation is everything, James," he responded, stepping away from the closet door, his hands now clasped behind his back. "What good is art if its provenance is questioned? What good is a patron if his judgment is flawed?" "So you orchestrated his death," I pressed, the tension coiling tighter between us. "Not with a bullet or a blade, but with something far more insidious. Something that mimicked a natural heart attack. A slow-acting toxin, perhaps, administered over time, designed to weaken the heart until it simply gave out. You had access, you had opportunity, and you certainly had motive." He let out a soft chuckle, a dry, unsettling sound. "You weave a fascinating tale, James, but a tale it remains. Where is your proof?" "The proof is in the details you overlooked, the ones Thorne meticulously documented," I explained, my gaze unwavering. "He kept a journal, a private record of his suspicions, hidden behind a loose brick in his study. It details his discovery of the forgery, the specific painting, the one you donated to the City Museum last year, and his growing certainty about your involvement. He didn't name you outright, but he left enough clues, enough allusions to your generosity and discretion, that it became undeniable once I started digging." I paused, letting that sink in. "And the final piece, the one you're looking for in that closet, isn't evidence against you. It's the confirmation of Thorne's journal entries, a sample of the anachronistic pigment he secretly extracted from the painting, which he hid here, in this very building, during one of his clandestine visits before his heart attack. He was preparing to go public, but you got to him first." His composure finally fractured. I added, a faint smile touching my lips. "Because the detective and his team are already upstairs, recovering Thorne's journal from his study. And the pigment sample, it's not in that closet. It's already in the hands of the authorities, waiting for forensic analysis to confirm its modern composition. My trap, my friend, was sprung the moment I believed I could outsmart Thorne." The patron's eyes darted around the lobby, searching for an escape, for any sign of a way out. His flawless facade had crumbled, revealing the desperate man beneath. His hand twitched, reaching for something I couldn't quite see. Just then, a door at the far end of the lobby swung open. The detective stepped out, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. "That's enough, sir," the detective said, his voice calm but firm. "We have everything we need." The patron's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him in an instant. He offered no resistance as the officers moved in, his eyes fixed on me, a silent, seething hatred in their depths. He was led away, his meticulous world of artifice and deception collapsing around him. The city's hum seemed to recede, leaving me with the quiet echo of my own thoughts. The benefactor, my mysterious client, had gotten their truth. I imagined them, somewhere far away, perhaps raising a quiet toast to Thorne's memory, to the fragile victory of authenticity over calculated deceit. The case was closed, the threads untangled. This job, like so many others, had been a journey into the twisted corridors of human desire, a reminder that some would sacrifice everything, even life itself, to protect a carefully constructed lie. And I, in my solitary pursuit, had once again peeled back the layers to reveal the stark, often ugly, truth beneath. I left the brutalist apartment block, stepping back into the indifferent embrace of the city night. The beast was caged, but the human capacity for deception, I knew, would always find new forms, new canvases. And I would be there, waiting to see them.